All right, NAI football fans, this is Corey Thorpe back with another edition of the NAIFBALL live show powered by AdCraft Custom Apparel and Merch, the best in the business since 1974. Great guys, NAI, born and bred, make some really great stuff. If you need to get your gear into the hands of your fans, give them a call. Their web stores are there for your disposal for that very idea. Well, we've got Angelo back this week. And it was a very interesting week in terms of flag football. We learned a couple things. We got a couple debuts. We say that we learn something every week. This week, I think we kind of really got an idea of who some of the teams are. And starts off with a nice bounce back win there for St. Thomas, a 13-0 win over Weber. You know, it's you say poor Weber, but you know they've got some work to do.
It's not necessarily an identity crisis for either team, but I mean, with St. Thomas, I think you and I, Corey, have both had a lot of high expectations for this team. You know, they were initial preseason favorite in terms of being one of the top three, and I think some of the other experts around the country were looking at St. Thomas as a team that this would have potentially been their year to finally take over the Sun Conference. But you still got other powers like Kaiser and Thomas that, you know, they're still holding their own. But I think there's a lot of offensive regrouping, for want of a better word, because their defense has always been exceptional. I think there's been a lot of talk about Leah Cruz potentially being that offensive factor that was going to really kick in, but we haven't seen that full offense come into effect. And of course, with Jada Graham back in the mix too, because remember, she hasn't been playing as consistent either. So this is one of those teams where this is still the St. Thomas team that everybody's known for the past 2-3 years, that great defense, offense just is missing that spark that can get them to the next level or to that next edge. And we're starting to see that in these score lines and results. I mean, low scoring games, they're still able to shut teams out. They're still able to keep it to within 2 scores. But, you know, once St. Thomas starts going up against powerhouses like Ottawa and others down the road, you know, that's going to be something where their defense is going to be tested, but the offense has to come up big and start playing hard too.
And I don't remember. One thing that's struck me so far for St. Thomas is that last year, you know, you had Julian Yolkowski gets benched middle of the season. You have Holly Neer. Yolkowski's just a sophomore. You think maybe that she'll come back strong. She's not on roster for this year. This is Holly Neer's squad right now.
It's, you know, there's a lot of things that can be said, and, you know, based off of talking with coaches, because with flag football, with it still being an emerging sport and being something where it doesn't have the same coverage as the other NAIA sports that you would anticipate or expect, you know, there's a lot of things that can happen within a coach's range of things, for want of a better word. And I know with all the coaches in the Sun Conference, they're very particular about what they wish to share and what they wish to keep things more confidential on. So, you know, it's more or less you have to keep your eyes and ears peeled. And, you know, here at NAIA football, it's one of those things where we're still in the process right now, Corey, of we have to make things a little bit more of a better effort to just try to figure out what's going on. Not necessarily snoop on teams, but just try to, you know, figure out more from an investigative standpoint on how teams are doing. Because again, you know, you can have a coach that's willing to share a lot of information, and then you'll have others that will still, you know, give you the base details, and others that will just keep you in the dark and say, just watch our games and find out.
That is a true statement. And you know, we go from one set of Sun teams to another here. Kaiser gets the 34-6 win over Reinhardt. Reinhardt had that nice start to their season, but Jasmine Roden and especially Adriana Rodriguez get it done. Rodriguez with 8 receptions for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sydney Woodman coming in clutch with 10.5 pulls. That's a great game from the linebacker. For Reinhardt, a little bit tougher. Alicia Wyatt, 20 of 33 for a $182 and a rushing touchdown. And at running back, the leading rusher for Reinhardt is some young lady named Jada Vick. Yeah, that Vick. For anyone mine and Angelo's age that played Madden '05, I'm sort of looking forward to seeing Jada Vick in person and seeing if she's half the joystick her father was, that's going to be a fun tool to use.
And I mean, again, this is a fairly young team with what Reinhardt has. So flag football has been a whole lot different than regular football. And even that we've seen back a couple of years ago in the inaugural AFFL games. I mean, Michael Vick was quarterbacking for flag football. So just like Jada's still learning the game, Mike is still learning the game too. And through there, it's a different dynamic of things. But it's great to see Jada Vick into the mix. And we can't wait to see how she continues to develop as the season goes on. But definitely a good start for somebody who's just coming out of the gate.
And then a big matchup over in the KCAC, one that I was really looking forward to, is kind of your 2-3 matchup, if you want to put it that way, and that is Kansas Wesleyan Midland. Kansas Wesleyan dispatches the Warriors 18-14. Chihiro Wada, the new Coyote from Tokyo, Japan, went to university in Tokyo. Another nice international pickup for K-Dub. Goes for 23 of 42 for 224 and 2 touchdowns, plus 46 yards on the ground. For Midland there, Angel Cayo, just a little off base there, 19 of 33 for $174. But Alea Livingston, man, she came to play. 7 receptions, 84 yards in a score, and 8 pulls and interception on the defensive side of the field. A nice early KCAC matchup that you feel like these are going to be two really good teams. I don't know if they're going to challenge Ottawa per se, but these are going to be two teams that are going to be right in the thick of it come Atlanta.
Well, with Kansas Wesleyan, as you and I both know, they've always been kind of the second or the runner-up team in the KCAC, compared to Ottawa's strength. But Midland, on the other hand, has been a rather developing team as you look at where they started in the first few years to where they are now, and they're progressively getting better. It may not necessarily show on a result standpoint or them suddenly starting to reel off games, but they're finding their mojo, they're finding their core nucleus that's going to be able to compete to a certain degree in the KCAC. And seeing this scoreline and how close they were to almost beating the Coyotes, I mean, this goes to show you that the dynamic in the KCAC is starting to change slowly, where it's not just your one or two teams that you expect to dominate in the KCAC. You got the other teams that are stepping up and they're starting to make some noise. And Midland's on the right track. I mean, again, this is what happens when you go season after season and you're trying to find your core group of players as well as the players that can make those impacts. And Alea Livingston, to your point, Corey, is a player that not only has to play both sides, but does it efficiently to a point where if you just get 2 or 3 more players just like her, watch out. The Warriors could be just that dangerous.
Absolutely. So let's then see how that shakes out our top 5 or top 6 here. And there's all of one change, and that is that Kaiser takes a first place vote, not away from Ottawa. That one had been to Reinhardt last week, but Reinhardt didn't make the top 6. And actually, Kansas Wesleyan and St. Thomas are not tied at 5th. That is my fault for not seeing that beforehand, but that order is correct. Ottawa, Kaiser, Warner, Thomas, Kansas Wesleyan, and St. Thomas. Partner, what do you what do you
you're
think?
Gonna get some people in the Coyote Nation that feel that mad disrespect right now.
Oh,
They're like, "Are you kidding me? 4-0 and we're still tied with a 2-1 Bobcats." Come on, they're feeling that right now, and it's like, well, you get an opportunity to prove us wrong here at the NAIA football once you get into that Reinhardt tournament and see what potential might come up. But I mean, slowly but surely, you got teams that are, like you mentioned, fighting your way through and just trying to find their rhythm and peace. And right now, it's fairly close, but at the same time, it's the Sun Conference. When you look at the play and how they've been playing together, it's tough. I mean, it's hard to try to look at quality based off of what we assume. It's like you want to see how teams are doing year by year, and it's not always about numbers. It's about trying to make sure from a quality standpoint that you got players that can compete as well, because in a regular season, not all tournaments or not all invitationals will have these ideal matchups that will allow us to see maybe a Kansas Wesleyan versus a St. Thomas on a regular basis. But that's where, again, when you have to judge it off and try to figure out, which is which, a lot of it can be guesswork at times, and other parts can be one of those you just have to find a way to see how the quality of games have been to get the rankings that we do.
Now, I will say, to hopefully allay some of those Kansas Wesleyan fans, this ranking did not take into account yesterday's action. This poll was sent out for the games that ended March 2nd, going through Saturday. So neither of your two wins on Sunday counted towards this. Now, that being said, the teams that you've faced so far, other than Midland, are St. Mary, who is 0-4 right now, with losses to a first-year Baker and a first-year Southwestern. And you have a win against Cotty, who is also 0-3 with losses to Baker and Southwestern, and a 75-0 loss to Ottawa. So I'm not digging on the quality of the KCAC competition, but just stating, yeah, it's 4-0. But I would like to see your opponent's record approach 500. So with that, we will be right back here after this message from our friends at AdCraft.
So you want to create and sell custom merch for your team or business. That's exciting, but where do you begin? How much inventory should you order? How do you distribute orders? AdCraft has your answers. Streamline the way you offer custom merch by utilizing our risk-free web store service. We ship directly to each customer, and we have the fastest turnaround in the game. Raise funds for your team or get merch to your employees and patrons. Contact AdCraft today, and let's bring your merch to life.
That's exactly what they do, and they are the best at it. Give them a call, shoot them a direct message, send them an email, contact them any which way you can. They are absolutely thebomb.com. Love working with them, and am so thankful that they continue to work with us in supporting our show. So let's take a look at a couple of games to watch for this week, and it is a very KCAC heavy week. I think all the Sun teams might be, apart from Reinhardt and Life playing today, I think pretty much all the Sun teams are on spring break.
Speaking of Life, Corey, we got an update right now. 10:18 to go. It's still tied at 7 in the third quarter. Life right now just getting over midfield and looking to try to get a first lead of the game
Against Milligan. So let's take a look at the very KCAC heavy, what to watch for this week. A Wednesday game at 6 p.m. Kansas Wesleyan goes and has to make their way over to the Mound Builders there. Southwestern 3-0. Kansas Wesleyan 4-0. It's going to be that's going to be a fun one to watch there. Two undefeated squads.
But again, like we were talking about in the last segment, it's like you look at the quality of games that both of these teams played. It's tough to say if this is a mismatch game or not, because regardless of who they played, at the end of the day, this is a battle of two undefeated teams. So it's really going to come down to, is experience going to win on out, or will the Jinx continue to find its way to magically get through its magical inaugural season here in an NAIA flag?
Hey, we've seen magical inaugural seasons before. I mean, it can happen.
Yes, sir.
Also on Wednesday, we finally, hopefully, see the first game from Graceland. Graceland's had some issues getting it off the ground so far. Hopefully they get it going here against Baker, who has been a really good squad so far. Their only blemish on the season, a loss to Ottawa.
I almost can't help but think, Corey, should we take a gentleman's bet right now on the show, see if this game ends up, going through, or if it ends up getting canceled tomorrow? We find out some news on the schedule, or just something that says whether it's from Baker or Graceland's end, game getting postponed or moved to a different date.
Yikes! I was thinking the same thing about Bethel, because Bethel had done close to the same thing, but they finally got it going there.
They got us a
off the
couple
ground.
of games in this past weekend.
I was
or this
happy
past
to see
week,
it.
I should say.
I've got my Threshy Nightmare Fuel shirt. Angelo, if you've never seen a picture of Threshy, yeah, Nightmare Fuel is putting it lightly.
I used to call them the churros. I mean, like, even when I was in NAIA SID, when you look at their logo, you don't think necessarily of Threshers. I mean, like, to me, to be fair, though, I'm also a food guy, too. So the way it was designed, you could either say the gears, the churros, or just anything that relates to just those gearish symbols that are, like, in that long cylinder formation.
Like, imagine a silver churro with eyes and churro hands. That is...
Is there such a thing as churro hands?
There is on Threshy.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. Hands down, my favorite mascot costume in the NAIA. It's terrifying. But we get a Saturday matchup to watch for, too. And it's Southwestern versus Bethel. We get a matchup of the first-year squads. Again, this is going to be one where, we might get an idea of who is going to be better in the KCAC. Who's going to be able to show out.
It's almost like when you look at these type of games, I mean, like, this is kind of comparative, and I'm just saying teams in general, not necessarily equating it to a conference deal, but to me, when you look at games like these, it's like saying Reinhardt versus Life, or Reinhardt versus Point, or Milligan versus Point, or even, say, Campbellsville versus, Graceland. Just throwing out names out there where it's like you got teams that are still trying to form their own, have some good quality about them, but to that point, you're trying to figure out where you are in the league and use it as a benchmark testing. Because, I mean, for both of these teams, you got, like you mentioned, 2 first-year programs that this is an excellent test to see where they are and how they've progressed up to this point. And also, if you look at towards the end of the year, where not just from a conference standpoint, but when NAIA, NFL, RCX, when they're analyzing which teams are which when it comes to the schedule format and the tournament format, these are going to be the games that count, and these are going to be the games where they're watching this, and this may be potentially your only shot in making sure you come out with a dub. So as much as there's the pressure of winning, at the same time, if you only get this one shot versus maybe seeing them in the KCAC tournament down the road, I mean, you want to make your best efforts count here. And this is a game that I know both teams have had circled on their calendar. But to your point, Corey, this will be another exciting match that I can't wait to see this Saturday.
And that makes a really good point as we kind of head towards the end of the show, is talking about the tournament and just kind of formulating it in our heads if we're going to be doing an all NAIA tournament again this year, which I don't see why we wouldn't. You've now got, so 2 years ago when we went with Thomas and watched that magical run, there were what, 12, 13 teams? Like max?
I want to say it was actually, Corey, I think it was 12, because remember in that year that we went, in that second year that NAIA did it, they did it in a compass bracket style, and they had 3 different pools, and it was pool A, B, and C, and they basically for the rankings did it snakes and ladders style, where you had the first seed in pool A, the second seed in pool B, the third and fourth seeds in pool C, 5th seed in pool B, and so on and so forth all the way down. So it made it fairly simple to determine who got to go to the gold bracket and which other team went into the silver bracket. But then last year they did away with that single elimination preliminary games, and they just straight out said, you know what, it's double elimination. And that was something where that was the coaches that decided on that. Personally, I thought that the preliminary games and then the single elimination brackets from then on out provides more opportunities for teams to play and get a little bit more of an experience versus the double elimination, where if you get unlucky that weekend and you lose both games, you're done. And what you thought you were going to be there for 3 days at least ends up being a 1-day deal. So, I mean, the coaches have a reason why they vote on these things. And this is something where I know has been constantly talked to about them to let them know it's like, hey, if you go with this method, these are the risks you run in terms of your flag experience tournament. You know, you want to spend time in Atlanta, or are you looking to try to take a chance and be one and done in the tournament where you're only there for a day and you're coming back home?
And so you look at it last year, you had 14 teams in that tournament, with Reinhardt not playing in the tournament and then Milligan also not playing in that tournament. So you have 12, you have 14. My question is, how on God's green earth are you going to jam 21 teams in a tournament like that?
Well, keep in mind too, Corey, there might be some teams that, depending on the situation, where there may be 21 teams, but you're going to be bound to have a couple of teams that, for whatever reason, either decline an invitation, may not have necessarily been good enough to make it in. I mean, like, this is all stuff that RCX has to consider when it comes to putting that schedule bracket together. Obviously, the idea is to be inclusive as much as you can, but at the same time, you want to make sure that the tournament format is going to make sense for everybody. Ideally, you want to have an even number of teams that are in, but if you do have an odd man team, then that makes it extremely difficult to try to put together a reasonable tournament bracket, because anytime you have an odd number of teams and you're doing a bracket, I don't care who you are, somebody's getting a bye. And maybe there might be some that are warranted a bye in the tournament, and others are like, why in the world does this team get a bye and we're still having to play? I mean, like, these are typical arguments that you hear in the flag football world in general, let alone just at the collegiate level.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about the scheduling of it too. I mean, you're going from let's say all 21, they're all healthy at the end of the year, and they're in a position to go. 12 teams, 14 teams. Okay, we can figure that out. That's not a ton of games. Now you're adding 7 more squads, and all of those games, RCX is going to have to figure out how to make that work. I don't know, just from a logistical standpoint, and having seen like the Home Depot backyard, for example. I don't really know that you can play games reasonably in the backyard.
Well, if you're still maintaining just 2 fields in general,
Yeah.
you know, if you're thinking about this from a logistical standpoint, if you're operating with 2 fields, either A, the tournament is going to need to be longer, or B, you're expecting teams to be ready to play even earlier than 9 a.m. You're probably looking at an 8 a.m. start time if you're looking to try to get everything in place. And you could have games starting as late as 7 p.m.
Yeah.
You know, it all depends on, and this is, of course, again, assuming that you're still going off of that double elimination mindset.
Yeah.
Because for every amount of games that there are, you have to make sure, A, you got the right fields for it, but B, you put out that tournament format and you have a certain number of possible games that can come out of it in all these different scenarios. I mean, you even think about baseball as an example and what they have to go through when it comes to brackets and scenarios. And if they have a 6-team double elimination tournament, there might be times where after 2 days you could still have 3 teams remaining, you could have 2 teams remaining, and there's all these different scenarios that you have to factor and consider in. Same thing with flag football, where although things are a little bit more organized in that double elimination scheme of things, you have to still look at what the logistics are from a field perspective, from, you know, making sure that everything is going to be completed in a certain amount of time. And mind you, again, with RCX Sports, remember, it's not just NAIA, but you also have the JUCO schools you need to consider in that match too, which is expected to be more than just 3 teams this spring.
At that park in Marietta, I can't remember what the name of it was offhand. Did they have 2 fields or did they have 3 out there?
At Franklin Gateway, I believe it was 2 fields that we worked with. There is a possibility of making it a third, but again, from a resources standpoint,
Yeah.
if you're looking at trying to add more fields in addition to the Mercedes-Benz and Home Depot backyard, I mean, like that's going to stretch the tournament staff thin. And you're relying on a system to make sure that scores are being updated and kept. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. Ideally, you want all the fields and facilities to be in the same spot, or at least generally in the same vicinity, not having to worry about different fields that are 20 minutes away from the stadium.
Right, and that was the drawback of Franklin Gateway. But you could play an opening day out there at Franklin Gateway and run all three fields, and you could get some games in. That might be what they end up doing, honestly.
Well, remember with how RCX is looking to do things, ideally they want to try to keep everything in the Mercedes-Benz Home Depot backyard. And the reason that they ended up doing Gateway last season was because there was a schedule conflict when it came to using the Mercedes-Benz stadium field itself and the Home Depot backyard. So there's a lot of factors from a tournament organization standpoint that you have to consider, and you don't always necessarily get your ideal date. So you have to make some compromises and adjustments in order to still make it work. Will we see another split of Gateway, then things going back to Mercedes-Benz and Home Depot backyard? Who knows at this point in time, but that's something that's still being developed. And I would imagine as we continue to move on in months, we'll have something a little more finalized. All we know right now are the dates for the tournament are May 7th through 10th. And some schools I've seen say May 8th through 10th, but that's more NAIA based, which could potentially hint at maybe is May 7th a date specifically for the JUCO schools to get through their tournament as much as they can, and that way you focus the back half on NAIA teams? Or is there another underlying story that we just haven't seen or developed yet? I mean, there's still a lot of questions out there, but from an organization standpoint, again, I mean, you want to make it work, but at the same time, it's also about the experience for these teams and making sure that it's something that RCX can provide a memorable experience for.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully we'll have more JUCO teams out there than just the three we had last year. I know there are more out there than the three that we saw. So hopefully we'll get to see more of them. But yeah, definitely. We may or may not have a vested interest in knowing exactly how this tournament's going to go down. So we'll let you know what we know.
That's why we have the NAIA football podcast here.
You're dang right. And it wouldn't happen without our patrons. They are the best at making sure that we are taken care of. And those people are DSU Cone, Bob Boone, Roger Meyer, Jeremy Vobble, Shirley LaBella, Fred Christensen, Jerry Quickle, Ace Wellen, Brett, Marty Seabolt, Nick Ryan, Hayden Ferrigno, Kyle Gregory, Tyler Pierce, Justin Hoffman, Steve Speakman, Brian Shake, Julianne Shager, Nate Soapbeer, Stephen Cutler, Julie Lout, Tim Burrow, Dale Norton, Nathan Moore, Dylan Gonzalez, Ryan, Jason Crawford, Zach Ryherd, Dustin Wilkie, Charles A. Flowers, Todd, Nick, Sean Chamberlain, Debbie, Zach, Lance, and Josue Trujillo. Don't think we've got any comments out there, but it's going to be a great week. Just even beside the three games that we pointed out, you've got Midland St. Mary, which will be fun. Reinhardt Milligan, that'll be a fun one. Reinhardt Campbellsville, and then next week, oh baby, we got a big old giant tournament next week to go over, and a lot of really, really good matchups.
If I was a betting man, Corey, I still feel like we're going to have a big shakeup of rankings because it's Reinhardt, it's in the middle of the season, and Waleska, you never know what can happen over there. And just when you think you have a team that knows it all, just they could be caught sleeping one day, and the right team comes along and upsets them. I mean, it's an endless possibility. But with that spring break trip, a lot of teams you normally see try to go to Florida, but for Reinhardt to step up, this is not just an opportunity for them to host some games, but also get an opportunity to show them as a staff what they have in terms of showing out as a flag football school potentially, and maybe showing off some facilities and looking at that as a potential opportunity to build something through that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very pretty stadium. Had the privilege of going a couple times to go see it. Great folks over there at Reinhardt. And so it's going to be nice. I mean, just looked at the weather. Obviously, it's not out for 2 weeks from now, but you're looking at high 60s, low 70s, which will be nice and warm to the Kansas teams and nice and cool for the Florida teams at this point of the year. It'll be. I don't think anyone's going to be terribly unhappy.
No, it's again your ideal spring break, and for Ottawa again, it'll be a nice little adjustment after going through that Midwestern weather and going into an area that, yes, Waleska's still in the mountainous area in Georgia, but again, to that point, weather-wise, it shouldn't be 30 or 40 degrees by any means. I mean, it should be nice, beautiful. Weather is crisp. When you look at the elevation that's also over there too, I mean, it's going to be some really nice weather for football.
Yeah, and it's not hilly and mountainous like it is about an hour to the northeast. They still, like, their leaves change like a week after, like, your traditional old lady goes up to see the leaves change cities. Gosh dang, just left my head. The little Helen, Georgia, the little Bavarian town in the middle of North Georgia. Up there. So it's still more like Atlanta than it is like a place like Helen. So it's going to be fine. So we're looking forward to it. We'll get you all those previews next week. But for now, for Angelo Pontello, I'm Corey Thorpe, and we will see y'all on the Twitter feed.